Okay, good morning. Happy Pascha. Okay, so I'm going to talk about why I became Orthodox. So I almost became Orthodox earlier, ended up rejecting it because I didn't understand why people who were not a part of the one true Holy Catholic and Apostolic Orthodox Church could still go to heaven. And later, when I was a Protestant, they taught us that, well, the Catholicism, Roman Catholic Church, is not a true Christian church, yet there are Christians within its ranks who will end up going to heaven. So I realized that was a bad reason for rejecting Orthodoxy, but by that point, I had plenty of other reasons to reject it. But I'm going to get to that later. So, I initially liked the harshness of Calvinism. I thought it was really, really cool. And I thought it was very soundly backed up by scripture and tradition. And then, about a little under a year and a half ago, I began to become very uncomfortable with the idea of God making people and just foreordaining them to suffer immensely in life, with them having no chance of escaping it because that is their fate. And so, I looked at the scriptures to see if there was any teaching against that I just wasn't aware of. And I began to really re examine TULIP in and of itself, the acronym for the Calvinist soteriology. And I thought, well, I can look at the Bible all day, and yeah, that's a good thing to do. But, this Calvinism has been taught by the tradition of the church by some very intelligent people. So I would be a little too bold to disagree with them. And I thought, wait a minute, this has only been taught by the tradition of the church for 500 years, since the Reformation. And earlier I thought that it was taught by the early church fathers, but I remember that I thought that because I read a few of their quotes that could have very well been taken out of context. So, excuse me, I decided to re examine this for myself. So I looked at other quotes of the church fathers, such as Irenaeus, Cyril of Jerusalem, I think him, and then Methodius of, I think, Jerusalem. Not the Methodius who went to Russia, 3rd century Methodius. Methodius of Olympus, not Jerusalem. And it seemed to me that these people taught free will or synergism and not Calvinism. But I thought, well, misunderstanding the church fathers is possible. It's not ridiculously hard to do. So I should look for just more than just the church fathers. I need to look at what scholars think about this and what Calvinists have to say about this. Now, John Calvin in the Institutes of the Christian Religion, I'm not going to provide the book and the chapter and the verse in there. You can find this for yourself from the generalization of the quote I'm going to give you. He said, well, the Greek fathers exalted the will of man too much. He also said that the church fathers, it's kind of hard to pin them down on what they think. So, but except Augustine. So he didn't say the early church fathers overall taught Calvinism or synergism, but he didn't say they taught free will, with the exception of what he said about the Greek fathers. So it seemed to me he wasn't basing his theology, or he wasn't claiming that the early church fathers overwhelmingly supported him. Okay, so that's interesting. So I looked at a website called A Puritan's Mind. I'm not going to provide the link. Find it for yourself. It's not hard. If you can't do that, you have bigger problems than you realize. And they listed a whole bunch of quotes from the church fathers that they thought supported Calvinism. And they said it's important to remember that these people taught this, for the most part, in seed form, whatever that means. I thought that was kind of conceding the argument. And I even read through much of those quotes. They had a lot of them, so I didn't read through all of them. But from what I read, I didn't think that they supported Calvinism. It seemed to me that the people in a Puritan's mind were just reading Calvinism into the quotes. Okay, so what next? Church councils. I thought, well, it's it's not too difficult to misinterpret a church father. But councils seem to be pretty clear, and that's what their whole point is. They got to be really, really specific and like really spoon feed it to people. what they're trying to say. So I found the Second Council of Orange, which I think was in the 6th century, and they said that they condemn anyone who believes that God has foreordained people to evil or would even want to believe such an evil thing. Uh, well, that doesn't automatically mean they're attacking what would later become known as Calvinism, but it's not. I don't think it's something a Calvinist would be all too delighted to see in an early church council. So I thought, well, yeah, I need something a little better than this. And I found out about the council, the Synod of Arles, and there were many of them, but this one I'm talking about was in the year 475. And there was a priest named Lucidus who was teaching predestination, and that they condemned what he was teaching. And the book I read on church history said there were like 30 bishops there. And then on another site I found out about, they said in the same year there was a Synod of Lyon in 475 that taught the same thing and reaffirmed what the Synod of Arles had said. Um, and I thought, well, this is all well and good, but I think I need a little bit more. I want to be really sure about what I'm doing, rejecting Calvinism. That's a serious decision. So I even read part of a book, the part of the book that was free online by Steve Lawson, who's a Reformed Baptist minister. And he is talking about, and his book is about the history of Protestant, or what would later become known as Protestant soteriology. And he talks about with the apostles, and then the set of church fathers after the apostles, and the set of church fathers after them. I forget what names he used to categorize them, but find the book for yourself. I might go and provide a link in the description, maybe. It's not hard to find, though. And he admits that I think it was for what my terminology, not his, the 2 generations after the apostles mostly taught synergism. Well, that's interesting, and that for me was just about the nail in the coffin for Calvinism. It's like the Calvinists are not trying to admit that, for the most part, are not claiming that the church fathers taught what they teach. In fact, quite a few of them will say, oh yeah, they didn't teach it, they taught synergism. Some of them will say they didn't teach either of them. But yeah, I think it's pretty clear that the early church taught synergism and not Calvinism, especially, or what would later become known as Calvinism, especially if you read the church fathers and the church councils. Okay, well, rejecting Calvinism is not enough to be Orthodox, because many Baptists, although not all of them, Lutherans, many, but not all Methodists, yes, there are Calvinist Methodists, and most Anglicans, they reject Calvinism too. So there's more to go on. Now, I had already believed in infant baptism from pretty early on. I mean, I believed it was taught by the church fathers. Hippolytus talks about it. Tertullian, who is not the best source for taking your theology, but in this case, he was not saying, oh, I believe infant baptism and stuff, and that's why we should do it. He was talking about how it was a practice in the church. So, yeah, it was, and he lived there was a writing from 180 AD. So I think there's very good evidence that infant baptism goes back early on in the church. But I can talk about that more later if I feel like it. And then there was the episcopal polity. Now, the letters of St. Ignatius of Antioch, who knew the Apostle John, he wrote to many different churches across the Mediterranean and Europe and Asia. And in many of those letters, he talks about bishop, priest, and deacon, or bishop, presbyter, and deacon, and respecting the bishop in the place of Christ. And so with his letters, you cannot use the argument that, oh, he's using bishop and presbyter interchangeably, as people often do with Paul's letters in the Bible. So I thought that was pretty clear, and there's also many other quotes from the early church fathers that recognize the episcopal polity. And I read stuff by Calvinists that say, oh yeah, it was pretty well established by the 2nd century. And now some of them will say that, oh, before that they had something more democratic, but I have yet to see any firm, solid evidence for that, other than just suppositions. But more on that later. because that's a little long for just a YouTube video. So I will see you all. I will talk to you all later. Goodbye for now. If you're wondering why there's a post-it on the calendar, it's covering up the address of the church I go to. I don't want to tell everybody where I live. And if I didn't cover up the address, you would all know where I live. And yeah, I don't really like that. Okay. No offense, I'm just telling you the truth.